Now I just want to quickly introduce, we have a panel coming up, and I just want to very quickly introduce the moderator, that's Dr. Joachim Kohn, who is the chair of our SAB, Scientific Advisory Board, and he is a really eminent figure in the field, right? Started the New Jersey Center for Biomaterials. I was the president for 22 years, and then the head of the Laboratory for Biomaterial Research at Rutgers. But also, Joachim had multiple technology get licensed by many different companies and really very successful. With that, to save time, Joachim, please take over.
I guess we should go up, right?
Yeah, I guess.
Or not. Okay. Is anyone else using?
Thank you very much. I, first of all, appreciate that we have an opportunity to present this, and I would like to ask our debaters to please come forward and take their seat. Frank, Jeff, Buddy, and while you take your seat, I'll move through the slides. And first of all, some background about debates and why it is different from just a normal session. And this comes from a website, and I think it's actually quite important, even so perhaps not immediately relevant to this meeting. And that is that more than ever, I think we have a need for an education of a particular kind, an education that trains one in the habits of exchanging ideas without prejudice and without canceling your opponents, and being willing to open your mind. There are people who are passionate about A, and there are other people who are passionate about B, and they start to fight with each other. But the truth is that instead of A or B, the best solution often is a mix of A and B. And if we aren't able to make that consensus building, we are not doing well as a nation. So that was early on recognized, and indeed debates were highly regarded from the time of ancient Greece, which is the origin of this debate format, all the way to the British education system as a means to learn how to argue. And so there are certain debate rules that I would like to introduce to you. And by the way, for the technical people in the back, please open our first poll, if you can. So debate rules are very simple. You have to create a statement. You have to create a statement that that either has a yes or no answer. So in this particular case, the question is: academic institutions in the US impede innovation. If you agree with this statement, academic institutions impede innovation and commercialization, you need to vote yes. You agree to this. It's a little convoluted because the statement is a negative and your answer in the positive. But on the other hand, if you think that academic institutions do a fairly poor job in supporting innovation and commercialization, you would have to you have to vote yes. And if you think they do a great job, you have to vote no. So this is a little complicated, but that's one thing. Now, in the other part is we have a team of debaters that argues either for or against this statement. So debaters are a team. There are two who are a team to argue for the statement and two that argue against. This is not a single man show. This is an effort for everyone. And debaters present their best arguments with humor and a fighting spirit, but always with civility and respect. So it is perfectly okay for one debater to say, so my esteemed colleague has just now presented something to you, and I will show you that he's completely wrong. And that's perfectly fine to do as part of a debate. Finally, the audience, that's you, listens, and people should be willing to change their mind and their opinion. That's really important. And finally, at the end, there's a poll at the beginning, which we are doing right now. So you can go to your app and vote either for the statement or against the statement. And then there will be a poll at the end of the debate. And obviously, the winning team is the one that moved the needle more to their side of the argument. But the real truth of the matter is, everyone wins. Because what we really want to do is we want to create a uniquely new perspective that emerges from your exposure to the different viewpoints that are there. And so are there actually different viewpoints? And yes, there are. If you look at this, you can see that some people think that the article, this article serves as an examination of the many positive benefits. Another article tells you why are academics so bad at tech transfer. And the third article really goes to the core of it and says university licensing is harmful to the advancement of science, is hampering the efforts of non-profit organizations. And so clearly there are different viewpoints there, and they are contradicting in any ways. But understanding what's going on is really important for all of us. Because, for instance, if you're looking for a career later in your life, if you're a younger student or at the beginning, and you're really liking innovation, if you reach the conclusion that academia is not the right place for this, then you probably don't want to be in academia. And so this could even affect your personal opinion about where you advance your career. So with this, let's do now the first poll. Please remember, academic institutions in the US impede innovation. So if you agree with this, you vote yes. If you think that institutions foster innovation and do a good job, you have to vote no. And if I could ask the technical team to quickly display the results. So you see, this is like Republicans and Democrats. we are basically evenly split, right? And so now let's see how this changes, if it changes at all. So if you stubbornly stay with your opinion, it will not change.
Like the Democrats and Republicans.
Yes,
Exactly.
no amount of, I can spend $1 billion and people don't change their mind. So let me introduce the debaters. We have a wonderful team. Frank Litvak was the co-director of a cardiovascular intervention center at Cedars-Sinai and a professor of medicine. After 2000, he became a trader and moved to industry. And in fact, he's very important to the Terasaki Institute because he was also the director of One Lambda, which was Paul Terasaki's original company. Buddy Ratner is his teammate and supporter. And he is a distinguished professor of bioengineering and chemical engineering at the University of Washington. He is a member of the National Academy of Engineering, a recipient of the University of Washington Medicine Lifetime Innovator Award. And so he too has started 7 companies and has lots of deep experience both in academia and in technology transfer. So this is the team that makes the point that academic institutions could do a much better job in supporting innovation and commercialization. Now on the other side, we have Jeff Karp, who is an amazingly productive member of the scientific community. What I like most about it, he has 30,000 citations on 125 peer-reviewed articles. I don't even know what that calculates in terms of the H factor, but it's probably through the roof. And he also has raised more than $600 million in funding and has a distinguished record in commercialization. And he's supported by Dave Mooney, whom you have heard speaking as one of our plenary speakers. He's the Robert P. Pincus Family Professor of Bioengineering at the Harvard School of Engineering. And he was also a founding core faculty member of the Wyss Institute, which is a wonderful building and a great organization if you're familiar with Cambridge and Boston. He's a member of both the National Academy of Engineering and a member of the National Academy of Engineering. So Dave, congratulations, that's a marvelous achievement. And he has done extensive work in commercialization, and he's the one who developed the first vaccine ever to eliminate melanoma tumors. So with this, I thank you for participating. I thank the Institute for giving us the opportunity to present this to you. And let's get started. Our first presenter is Dr. Litvak, who will blow you away with telling you how bad academia is. Please.
Yeah. Thank you, Joachim.
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, welcome everybody. And I've been so impressed with the talks this morning, and I'm delighted to be here and humbled to be on a team with Buddy Ratner, and equally humbled to have such august, accomplished academic counterparts on the other side of the debate. So Buddy and I were very kind to our opponents. We gave them the easy side of this debate. It's going to be easy. They're going to show you a list of X number of companies and licenses that were extremely, lucrative and successful. But we're here to talk about the real world and what's going on out there. So with that, we're going to also address this in a very holistic manner. We're going to give a 1-2 punch here. We're going to start at a very high level and talk about how academic institutions impede innovation and commercialization in more than the obvious way being that they have, to put it kindly, less than optimally functioning tech transfer offices. But we're going to actually give you a more holistic and complete argument so that we can prove to you that our side is correct and that my esteemed opponents picked the wrong side of the argument. Can I have the next slide, please? Well, I'm going to stipulate right up front, like a lawyer. I'm not a lawyer, but I've come up against a few in my day. I'm going to stipulate that there are a limited number of cases of spectacular success in the area of tech transfer. But for those of you who are golfers, like a hole-in-one, they don't actually reflect the norm. And you see here this famous golfer in the white shirt. He got a hole-in-one here. I hear he's actually a pretty lousy golfer and he cheats. So let's not generalize from small events. We all know as scientists that we need to look at the larger picture. Next slide, please. So let's just take it right now to the 30,000-foot level. And let's look at innovation. This is an innovation institute. And examine the role of research institutions. Well, for sure, the first and most important role probably is to educate future innovators. That's number one. But then, as we go a little bit deeper, they need to discover and rapidly, and I put rapidly in bold, disseminate the new knowledge so that it gets out into the world for everybody to use. And then they need to facilitate the development of new products, drugs, devices, software, tools. We tend, this is a very bioengineering oriented meeting, but really the concept of tech transfer is much broader than that. And I'm here to tell you, and I think you're going to believe it when we're done, that just like the gentleman in this particular cartoon, they tend to overpromise and underdeliver. Next slide, please. So let's go through this one by one. Educate future innovators. Okay, again, I'm going to stimulate that they do a pretty good job teaching how to become a good researcher, teaching the scientific method. There's no question about that. We're not going to argue about that. But I am going to tell you, and I think that there's an enormous amount of backup information on this, that academic institutions, as part of their mission to educate, they neglect teaching several critically important aspects of commercialization and product development. There is such a field as product development. That's never touched. Regulatory and clinical affairs, rarely touched. And there are some exceptions. Fundraising. This is absolutely, it's the oxygen of innovation. How to deal with venture capital, basic finance. Forget about IP, that's a whole other story, and how to manage and navigate IP, and how to form and develop a company. Young graduates, as it turns out, from many of these institutions, they can end up with, very, very expensive degrees, but they're very frequently unprepared to enter the real world, the world of product development. Next slide, please. You don't need to believe me. Believe the august nature Biotechnology Journal, one of the leading journals in the field. They recently, I think this is November 22, had an article called Mind the Gap, Closing the Growing Chasm Between Academia and Industry. What does a chasm mean? Chasm means there's a gap between A and B. Next slide, please. Can I have the next slide? Okay. And in that article, they kind of had a pretty damning assessment of the way we train innovators. They said, quote, drug developers are often unconventional people. We know that. We've met many of them. They're eager to venture into new areas. They are seldom prepared to take the leap into drug development. Multiple subjects, as I mentioned, are not taught. And quote, it is no wonder that fewer biotech workers are succeeding. If the biotech workers are not succeeding, then the institutions are impeding one of their key scientific and educational missions, training the innovators and product developers of the future. Next slide, please. Okay, let's talk about rapidly disseminate and discover. You know, they don't do a good job at rapidly disseminating, and they don't do it because they're using 20th century mindsets and methods. First of all, we all know that academics and academia communicates by two principal methods. One, peer-reviewed, high-impact publications, and two, generation of IP, okay? I am here to tell you that in the 21st century, the obsession with both of these elements of communication wastes an enormous amount of otherwise productive time that should and could be used for discovery, and it slows the dissemination of knowledge. When knowledge is not disseminated, others are not picking up the thread. We know all great innovations tend to be essentially have a herd effect to it. Next slide, please. So, you know, what are the current parameters of academic advancement, and why do they impede progress and waste time? Well, if your priority is to turn your discovery into a, quote, high impact publication so that you can get tenure and move along, we all know that it can take months, sometimes years, to get this stuff published, especially if you're an out-of-the-box innovator, which is where the great ideas really emanate. And there's many examples of this. If you read about the history of immuno-oncology, you know, and the early work on CTLA-4 and the checkpoint inhibitors, you know, some very august scientists, I have my name up there, it took sometimes years to get the stuff published. That's years that information didn't get out to the community of innovators who could then create next steps towards creating life-saving and life-enhancing products, okay? So, you know, researchers waste an enormous amount of time on this. 28% of academics' time is spent writing and revising papers, okay? And, you know, it's time to consider a whole new way of looking at how we share information. You know, there's all these new open science, open source platforms. I mentioned a couple here on this slide. And this academic, you know, obsession with putting PDF papers into the literature as opposed to using modern digital technology just slows things down. And remember, time is innovation. If things are slowed down a year or two, that's the thousands of other research who are not taking the thread of that idea and further developing it. This is not an obvious argument for why academic institutions impede innovation. The obvious one is their lousy licensing departments, which we will talk about in detail, but it's equally important. Next slide, please. The next one I want to talk about, it's just old-fashioned greed. Academic institutions have, in the last 30, 20 years, become obsessed with filing and protecting intellectual property. Now, there are a few notable licensing bonanzas. I'm sure you're going to hear about them from my august colleagues here. But let's be clear, data supports the vast majority of patent filings are a total waste of money and yield no return. Next, filings can take months or years before the investigator even gets the green light to present it at a meeting such as this or at a more formal, larger scientific conference. As I said before, when information is not disseminated, it means the thousands of brilliant researchers out there can't pick up that thread of innovation. And, you know, even worthless patents, okay, you say it's just wasting time. Economically worthless patents may have information that is useful to other researchers who want to innovate. And not only is it useful, they may not be able to do what they need to do because they find somebody's patent there, which is economically worthless. So they got to go off and license it. So over-patenting and useless patents are a toll, an actual financial toll on innovation. Okay? So this most recent obsession with IP is clearly, unquestionably, denying knowledge transfer, impeding innovation, and wasting a boatload of money. Next slide, please. Think universities are making money from inventions? And I think Buddy's going to go into this in more detail. By and large, they're not. Let's look at this next slide over here. Okay, next slide, please. Now, this looks interesting, right? This is 2013 top 15 tech transfer moneymakers. Okay, look at the top of the list. There's some real big moneymakers. You're sitting in one of them right now, the UC system, which has umpteen campuses. But it doesn't take long to get to the bottom of the list. Number 14 and 15 are making $1 million or $2 million a year. Trust me, they're spending more than that. And this is the top 15. There's hundreds of institutions out there with tech transfer offices that are not earning their keep. And they lose money. And where does that money come from, ladies and gentlemen? It comes from your grants, the so-called overhead on your grants. And that's money that you should be using as an innovator, as a researcher, and doing product and commercial pre-development. Next slide, please. Okay, final, getting close to the end here. We all know, it ain't no secret, that tech transfer offices perform poorly. And Buddy's gonna really go into this in detail in the anchor leg of our debate. They're not up to the task. Look who works in tech transfer offices. They're very nice people, but most of them have no real-world experience in pharma or devices, and they have no formal training. They're hospital administrators, sometimes they're lawyers who come almost directly out of law school and work in hospitals. As Buddy's going to show you with graphic detail, they almost always have unrealistic expectations. They create cumbersome licensing agreements, complex deals, many demands, suck cash out of early stage companies. They're bureaucratic. In fact, in my experience from my days in academics, they're often autocratic. I won't get into my own experience, but you know, they're slow and inflexible. And very importantly, they often exclude the scientists from the process. I'm not talking about elite institutions, Harvard, MIT. Those guys are pros. But let's look at the rest of the world. The world is not only Harvard and MIT, after all. Okay, although in Boston, they believe it is. Okay, and then a couple of more points before I close. The scientists are often not even incentivized to lean in. Their economic participation can be 10, 15% after overhead. It reminds me of Hollywood. Oh, don't worry, you're going to get paid a piece of the net after overhead. Nobody ever gets paid. So they'd rather focus on getting famous and publishing their papers and presenting at great conferences. Okay? So you got it. This is my last slide. So despite great science, university spinouts are bring less than 1% of annual startups in the United States. Next slide. I'm not going to go through this one because I'm out of town, but this is the top 15. You can see once you get to 13, 14, 15, there's nothing going on. There's not a lot happening. Again, let's eliminate the elite institutions. Next slide, please. So this is your typical university scientist entrepreneur. He's like Sisyphus. He just keeps rolling the ball up the hill and gets crushed by it. And to close, just tie it all together. Next slide, please. I've shown you the beginning of our argument. Academic institutions get at best, and I'm being generous because I'm an easy grader, B- when it comes to facilitating innovation and commercialization. They don't give the scientists, the proper training in product and company development. Okay, the academic paradigms for information advancement are inconsistent with the 21st century required pace of innovation. They're obsessed with IP because a few people have made money, and it slows everything down. They can't filter good inventions from junk inventions, so they waste everybody's time and money that should be going into research. And the whole area is just a mess, and it makes licensing and startup foundations slow, cumbersome, demoralizing. What does that mean? Slows innovation and product development. Thank you. I'm sorry if I ran over a minute.
Yeah.
Now keep your mind open. You may hear a different story.
Oh, yeah. Do you have the plug here? Oh, here it is. Oh, no video in this one, not this one. No? Ah, there we go. There we go. Do you see there it is. Perfect. All right. Thank you, Joachim, for organizing this debate. And thank you for my colleagues here for making this a great learning opportunity. I think most of the statements that were just made are interesting, but we are not debating what is or isn't the norm. We are debating if academic institutions prevent innovation, impede. My colleague showed the top 15 innovative institutes, but it is critical to consider that tech transfer revenues is not the right metric. That's not the metric that matters. It's impact. We strongly support that academic institutions in the United States do not impede innovation and commercialization. This is evidenced by, one, many hugely impactful examples that I will show you. Governmental support through transition of control to academic institutions. And data, a lot of data that supports that increase in academic research funding leads to more and more innovation. Something must be working. I also want to emphasize that from my personal experience of co-founding 10 companies from academia, I can attest that while it's brutally difficult every single time, I have experienced incredible support from all corners of the academic institution that I am part of. And while only 12.5% of US R&D is performed by academic institutions, academic tech transfer has contributed to greater than 25% of all medicines approved from 2001 to 2019. This is not just a few examples, there are many. Also, check out these incredible, well-known examples that spun out of academia, from software to food to medical industries, including Google, CAR-T therapy, autonomous vehicles, drug delivery, and even Honeycrisp apples. Just by show of hands, how many people here have used Google in the last day or so? Everyone, right? You have the tech transfer offices to thank for that. At Stanford, Sergey Brin and Larry Page tried to get venture capital funding outside of the university, but no one would invest in their algorithm. And so they went to their tech transfer office, who warmly supported patent filings that then led to the formation of Google. And although innovation was impeded prior to 1980, when academic tech transfer was more centralized, the Dole Act completely changed this. So prior to 1980, government-funded academic inventions belonged to the government. No royalties flowed to inventors or to institutions, and the government would only issue non-exclusive licenses. So this severely reduced the potential for tech transfer. And Joe Allen, who leads the Buy Dole Coalition, who I spoke to, said this was a predictable, static system. Now, in 1980, all of this changed by moving to a decentralized model. Each university was given their own innovation process. They had the freedom to take risks, to succeed, or to fail. And royalties were given to inventors and to institutions. This is a lot of support to highly incentivize inventors to invent patents and to try to bring new technologies to the market. Shortly after 1980, the number of patents issued exploded, and so did the number of tech transfer offices. This is demonstrating direct support that academic institutions support innovation. This science paper, published in 2019, concluded that federal research increasingly appears to fuel innovation that ultimately leads to jobs, industrial competitiveness, and entrepreneurial success. And academic institutions are a major destination for that funding. Now, our opponents here will talk about many interesting metrics, but ultimately, it's all about improving the quality of life for taxpayers and driving the US economy. Check out these statistics. Academic tech transfer since the Dole Act was put into effect has led to $1.9 trillion for the US gross industrial output. 6.5 million jobs were created, over 200 drugs and vaccines were developed, and greater than 15,000 startups. Let's take a deeper look at the flow of resources to understand how academic institutions are not impeding innovation. Rather, they are supporting it. Funds from the NIH, NSF, DoD, and other federal institutions flow to academic institutions directly to research labs. These funds go to the research to primarily support professional development and a fertile breeding ground for creativity and academic scholarly activities. And this feeds into academic innovation through the tech transfer offices, which then license those patents to industry and startups. And the more money that government dedicates to research, the more innovation we see as a function of startup companies. Notice how funding support has increased substantially over the past 25 years, and there is a direct correlation between the amount of money that's going to research and innovation. This would not happen without academic institutional support. Let's pause for a moment to drill down on a critical recent example, COVID-19. The COVID-19 vaccination program in the US prevented more than 18.5 million hospitalizations. 3.2 million deaths were prevented. And without vaccination, we would have had 120 million more COVID-19 infections. And it's been stated that the vaccination program also saved the US $1.15 trillion in medical costs. Academic innovation made the COVID vaccination possible. If we look at the work of Carrico and Wiseman at the University of Pennsylvania, there were decades of NIH support that led to improving mRNA stability. Rossi's work at Harvard looked at reprogramming cells, and that was a huge contributor to Moderna's success and early foundation. And Bob Langer's work in delivering nucleic acids over decades with NIH support was also critical. Decades of federal funding supported academic innovation through creating a whole entrepreneurial system. When I spoke with Joe Allen, the executive director of the Buy Dole Coalition, who actually helped set up the Buy Dole Act, he said, we need to consider that many institutions are not performing well, as my colleague highlighted. We see a lot of variability because innovation is hard and unpredictable, as he said, and the quality of research and the health of the economy is highly variable. While academia does not impede innovation, it does not automatically set up the preconditions for innovation success. This is critical. I spoke with Chris Coburn, who's head of the Tech Transfer Office for Mass General and the Brigham Hospital, and he said, we can always do better. We are very committed to that concept, but it's important to consider that this is a complicated meeting of two cultures. So how is it possible, I ask you, that academic institutions have impeded innovation when we have so many successful examples? When government support has transitioned control to academic institutions to really empower them, and all of the strong data that we have that supports that increase in academic research funding leads to more innovation. While more support would be helpful to fuel more success, it is clear that academic institutions do not impede innovation. Thank you.
Nice job.
Okay, let's move immediately forward. This does sound like Republicans and Democrats a little bit. I was that we have to stop forward. We will not be quite finished in 18 minutes, so I hope that the organizers can accommodate just a few minutes extra. Buddy Ratner, please.
Okay.
Let's go.
Great. Thank you, Joachim, for organizing, and I want to thank my teammate, Frank, and my other naive colleagues for what they're saying here. So I think the general point, and actually Jeff made the point very nicely, is that academic institutions are indeed fountains of innovation, but the question is, do the institutions impede that innovation? So I'm going to, I can wear two hats in this talk. The bottom hat, my academic hat, I'm going to take off and put on my cowboy hat, my company hat, and talk from that perspective. Next slide, please. So I could probably end here. There's a brilliant article that came out on a very interesting website, Zenodo, which is totally encouraging open publication and communication. The site itself is interesting, but the title, Full Cost Accounting, shows the emperor has no clothes, universities investing in technology transfer via patenting lose money. And by full cost accounting, this is like a 30, 40-page article with detailed mathematics. In fact, frankly, out of my ability to do the sort of accounting, the economics involved, but it seems to be an extremely exquisitely structured article. And one of the conclusions is the opportunity cost for writing patents instead of grants being more than 33 times the income realized through IP protection. So if professors just sat and wrote grants, they'd bring in 33 times more money than the time wasted doing patents and other things. And again, they worked through this. But let's go on. That's just kind of the framework here. Next slide, please. Okay, so just start with an example here. The professor works for 20 years, maybe, to bring his or her technology to commercialization. We do this for the public good. In doing so, he fulfills the mandate, again, to work for the public good. Okay, so where does the technology come from? Who envisions the technology? Please, next slide. Click. The professor envisions the technology. Tech transfer offices don't do this. Who funds the technology? Next slide. Professor got to bring in all that money, agonizing, but we do. Who supervises the work leading to the proof of concept? Who supervises those students? The professor. Who works with the patent attorneys to protect the IP? Who has the details? The professor. Now, does the university have its own ability to commercialize the specialized technology? Next, no. And who owns this technology? Bingo. The university owns the whole thing. We do all the work. We get all the money. What do we get for it? We get, I'll tell you what we'll get in a minute. Next slide, please. Instead of the university ownership of IP, maybe just give it to the professor. Successful university entrepreneurs have given huge, gigantic gifts to the university. So in 2023, for example, big donors gave universities $4 billion. I don't know how much of that is successful entrepreneurs, but all the big gifts come from very successful people. I find mostly entrepreneurs. And pissed off professors may not give back to their institutions. And I'll tell you where we get pissed off. Next slide. So there's, Frank mentioned the greed factor. And yes, there have been some big hits, but most universities do not generate impressive returns. And why? Let me start with examining an actual university intellectual property term sheet for professors seeking to license his own technology. This is extracted from an actual term sheet. So these are the stipulations in a university term sheet to a faculty. And what does the faculty want? They simply want to take their technology and get it out into the world. So first of all, they put performance milestones, and there's just a few little examples, but you have to meet these milestones, jump over these hoops, or else it costs you more and more money, comes out of your startup company. They want equity, 5% with an anti-dilution clause. VCs hate anti-dilution clauses, so it already inhibits you there. They get a royalty of some royalty. There's a typical royalty. You get 3%. Next slide, please. I'm going on, continuing with this. Same term sheet. We're continuing. Minimum animal fees. We pay money. Here's a startup company just struggling and got to come up with all these minimum animal fees. Sub-license consideration percentages, acquisition consideration percentages, and we got to pay all the patent prosecution costs, and including all the costs that have been paid already by the university. Next slide, please. So maybe this quote from the Bible is appropriate to think of what the universities want to extract from a potential academic entrepreneur. Next slide. Okay, so the term sheet goes on, blah, blah, blah. You saw a term sheet. Then the license agreements. Typically 29 to 35 pages long of stuff. Here's my idea, and I invented a new word for this, a sensible license agreement. Period. One sentence. The university will get 3.5% of the royalties of sales. These startups have an imperative need to preserve cash on hand. If the company succeeds, the university succeeds. It's very simple. Why stop the company from proceeding? Because of greed. Successful company is going to bring much more money and also bring a happy professor that when the professor gets wealthy, still waiting, but anyway, when the professor gets wealthy, give back big gifts to the university, very typically. Next slide. So why should professors own their own IP? Well, if I publish a book, the university doesn't own the rights to the book. It's my creative work. If I write a symphony, the university doesn't own it, even if I'm in the music department. What does the university own my IP? Greed. Simple greed. Next slide. Again, there have been so many articles. We're running out of time. I don't want to read the list. Why are there so many articles over and over? False promise, campus innovation missed. There's the full accounting article, think universities make lots of money. Got articles over and over again of people emphasizing this point about how poorly the universities do it. It's not the professors, and it's not innovation. It's those licensing offices. Next slide. What about state laws and ethics laws? I think the most appropriate thing is full disclosure. And this whole conflict of interest thing that we get, professors get pushed up against by universities from the academic offices. Does the professor provide full disclosure? The answer is yes. Look, are the students not being negatively impacted? I think the students are positively impacted by professors that do this. Is the professor doing their job? Well, you know, a typical professor, what, 40-hour week? It's ridiculous. It's an 80-hour week. We got 40 hours we can put to entrepreneurial activities and do our job with 40 hours. And is the professor contributing to the public good by generating new technology, jobs, taxes? Yes. So if the professor can say yes to all the above, is there a conflict of interest? I know I have been challenged because I have done many entrepreneurial activities with the university, conflict of interest? No, I think there's no conflict of interest there. Next slide. And again, in the public interest, I've served at a public university now for 51 years. And personally, I probably would not have an academic degree if I didn't get a BS degree, not from one of the snooty private universities, but a nice public university. I believe in public universities, and shouldn't they be focusing on what they really do best, which is education, research, maybe innovation. Next slide. So we're going to finish up here. The Dole Act passed by Congress, 1980, stimulate investment in commercialization of scientific inventions, allows the university to elect ownership of inventions. Doesn't say they have to keep them. It should be the university's choice, and maybe the university is making a bad decision in electing almost all IP. Let me put it all IP. Next slide. And that might finish it. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your attention.
Go.
Okay.
Dave Moody, go
Okay.
right ahead.
Well,
Blast it off.
thank you. So it's been a lot of fun. I've really learned a lot. Maybe I'll start by just addressing a couple of things that came up. So I do think our opponents, while they're esteemed, are mixing and matching a few things here, and perhaps confusing the issue. We talk about greed, and the universities have been accused of greed. My understanding is the opponent's version is the universities are too greedy, so they should give up some of the money, so the inventors get more of that money. So I think it's just changing places where the greed actually may exist. You know, when we talk about the time spent writing grants and writing patents, if there are 33 times more grant money out there to be gotten, I would be spending much more of my time writing grants. The reality is the NIH, the NSF, they're spending all the money they can get. Writing more grants doesn't actually help me. But maybe we can start with my slides. Oh, good, it's up. Okay, so you know, this is the University of Michigan at a glance. It's actually, I was a professor there for a number of years, and I think, you know, one of the arguments my opponents would make here is that the university spend a lot of money and get not that big of a return. That's more or less what we've been hearing, right? That there's not a great return on investment. Can we go to the next slide, though? But I think one thing that we have to realize is a big part of these research dollars that universities get and that they spend are intended to do other things than start new companies or generate innovation. So for example, we get the next click, please. About 25 million people in the United States have MS and PhD degrees, so advanced degrees. Those are largely funded by them doing research in academic laboratories. So a big part of basically the funding at universities is not intended to create new companies. It's intended to educate all of us who can then go and actually participate. Could I get the next slide, please? So we could ask, though, if we're going to say universities are really bad at this, but they only spend a small fraction of their time and effort doing this, what would happen if universities really change and they said, our whole goal is to foster innovation and commercialization? So if we go forward, this is actually an overview of Harvard. And actually, I think my opponents actually, in addition to the other limitations of their arguments, are largely living in the past. A lot of the data they were presenting was quite old, and actually I did notice that Harvard University, even though there's been some slurs against it today, wasn't even listed in the top 15 of either the list that came up earlier, and it shows how much things have changed. But in any case, so this is Harvard. Harvard spends about $1.24 billion in R&D expenditures. That ended up in, you know, a variety of metrics of things, but let's look at startups, 23 startups. And my opponents will tell you that's horrible and shows you how badly the system works. Let's go to the next slide. Well, what would happen if universities actually instead said, no, we're going to have the goal being we want to innovate and do commercialization. And I think that's what the Terasaki Institute is trying to do here. The Wyss Institute at Harvard is trying to do that as well. When we set up the Wyss, we purposely said, we're not here to educate in this institute. The rest of the university does that. So we're here to do translation, commercialization, innovation. And so if you actually focus within a university setting on that, this is kind of what the Wyss has done over the last 13 years or so. So 55 startups, we now account for about a quarter of the startups at Harvard University, 14 faculty as versus 1,000. $2 billion in startup venture funding, a pretty good return on the investment that the Wyss has spent in funding. So if a university is solely there to do commercialization and innovation, it can do an incredible job, but it's doing a lot of other things. So, you know, the numbers are not going to be that great. Can we go to the next slide, please? Now, along these lines, what else can universities do to pursue innovation and commercialization, and what are they doing? If we go forward one slide. Well, one thing they're doing is they're actually trying to help bridge this chasm that got brought up earlier that does exist and is a very real thing. So many universities are setting up accelerators where they're taking funds and they're actually giving that little bit of money that you need at the very early stages to try to bridge a gap. So many universities are doing this. The other thing they're doing, if we can get the next slide, is they're saying if we really want to enhance innovation and commercialization, we actually need to train the people to do it. And this came up earlier as well, that basically universities don't do this. Well, this is actually a web grab from the University of Washington, I believe, talking about their undergraduate entrepreneurship curriculum. So universities in the last few years are starting to take on this task to actually not just generate the research, but actually generate the people with the right training to take these inventions out of the academic labs into the real world. So this is University of Washington. Can we go to the next slide, please? This is Stanford, who basically has had a long track record of doing this. Can we go to the next slide, please? And in case you think I'm just cherry picking, I went to Google. It was basically started based on academic research and technology transfer, and just put in these keywords. And basically, you know, universities all around the country are now doing these types of activities, where they're trying to enhance the ability of the people in the universities to understand technology transfer, and actually make it happen. So, you know, if we go to the next slide, please. I'm trying to go really fast here because I know we're running out of time. So academic institutions and innovation. You know, as Jeff pointed out, there's some incredible success stories, and many, many of them, not a few cherry-picked. There's many of them. Can we go forward one bit? Now, we all know that results vary by the university, but there are a lot of experiments underway to try to further enhance this, as I just mentioned, developing new mechanisms to enable, teaching the next generation how to innovate. And actually, I guess, instead of blaming the universities and saying the universities are really terrible at innovation, if you're at a university that isn't very good, it's our job to actually try to help them learn how to do it better. So instead of throwing stones, let's actually help them try to build and do it better. So I'll wrap up by saying, from my perspective anyways, and I think Jeff shares this, and I think many of you do as well, it's clear that academic institutions do not impede innovation, but actually enable innovation and enable many of the really wonderful things that we're seeing in our country. So thank you for your time, and I'll finish up there.
Thank you very much. This was really great. At least it's very rare that you hear the full spectrum of different opinions, and you heard them in passionate terms. It's hard to digest everything, so we have, I would like to give each team member just a minute to rebut one point that they found is not quite right with the other team. So we go through the same order again. 1 point and no more than a minute. Look at we have a watch here. So let's go.
Okay, I only have 1 point. There's so many, so I'm only going to focus on one. No one's saying that buy Dole was bad. It was great. What we're saying is that the system is broken. And in fact, Professor Mooney has actually been a person who started his own, I think it's called the Wyss Institute, that you're the creator of. That was built to solve the problem. It proves our case. The system was broken. He needed to create a whole darned institute, and he's done a great job. and it's been very successful. Why did you create the institute if the system is not broken? That's my point.
Perfect. Let's go to the next speaker, please.
I would say, oh, my microphone on? Oh, perfect. Okay. I would say that let's think for a moment about evolution, right? Perhaps the most successful innovation model that we know. Evolution does not impede life. Evolution has a very high failure rate, but it's incredibly successful. And I think it's the same for academic innovation. There are a lot of failures, there is a lot of variability, but it's just, you know, I think it's academic institutions have been empowered and they have the freedom and the enablement to innovate. And I think that, as Dave has pointed out, there's been so many examples that have affected all of us in a very positive way.
Thank you very much. Buddy Ratner.
You know, so this point, I think, has been made very well. Universities are indeed the font of innovation, and so many developments have come from them. What we have to do is get beyond the barriers that prevent it from getting out of the university and impede success. And part of my argument is the university bureaucracies do slow this down, but institutes like the VIS and like the Terasaki are indeed trying to find a new model. Why do we need the new model? They have to get beyond the universities. Look at the title of this talk, Universities Impede. These new institutes are trying to get beyond the university barriers, often impeded by state ethics laws, impeded by many things, and just to make it more facile. I think I'm very proud of the academic institutions and my own institution too, for the incredible innovations. But we have to speed them out into the world and just not prevent things from happening. Thank you.
Dave Mooney.
Okay, so maybe Jeff covered a lot of things. You know, we heard about this obsession with patenting. I think I want to address that. You know, without patenting, there's nothing to commercialize. I think we all appreciate that. So patenting is critically important. Also, for us as academic investigators, without patents, there's basically no way probably for us to get any significant return on what we're doing. So I don't think there's an obsession with patenting at the universities. I think it's an appropriate mechanism to actually provide value and provide incentive for development. And if we got rid of it, it actually would make the ability of academic inventions to go out into the world would actually be significantly inhibited. So I think that, you know, I do want to address that.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Now the last word in this debate is your word. Could we open up the poll again? And let's see whether any one of you has actually changed their mind. So please go back to the app. And let's see, if you need a little bit more time, let's wait another minute. It's coming up.
Just like the
I would like to point out that we don't accept lawsuits about the validity of the polling. I know that the gentlemen in the past have received gifts from a certain team. So
we have a pen. We have a pen for you if you vote.
A few more seconds. Has everyone voted? Is everyone still working on it? Then we are basically in a real world model.
Oh, there we go.
There we go.
What?
Okay. Tech team, is this the end? Is this the final say? Yes, okay. So
Smart audience.
I'm delighted to announce the winner. The winner is you. The second runner-up is the team that argued that academic institutions impede innovations because they move the needle further than the other team. So some people got convinced that universities are not as good as they seem to be. So let's give all of us a wonderful round of applause. Thank you.
That's so much fun.
And I particularly appreciate the time and effort that our speakers did. Remember, this is not their traditional academic talk. They really had to set time aside to do this. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Let's enjoy lunch.